What a treat to be here with you all. I'm Scott Rogers. I'm looking forward to talking to you all about this thing called mindfulness, and in particular, to be taking some of the threads, some of the ideas, some of the practices even that have been talked about and raised so far, many of which probably resonate with you because we are human beings, and authenticity and presence and communicating, grappling with ambiguity. These are things that we as human beings know so very well. And to allow this conversation about mindfulness, which I'll assume is new to you, but I suspect that for many of you it's not completely new, that you've heard about it, maybe you've read about it, maybe you've practiced it in some form, even bringing an awareness to our toes to cultivate presence, or the bottoms of our feet, has a quality of what this thing called mindfulness is perhaps about at its deepest level, which is be really here, to be present for the life that we're living as we're living it, whether we're on the basketball court, whether we're in the C-suite, whether we are at home. And how do we do that? And there's many ways of doing that, but mindfulness is a particular approach, if you will, much more than an approach. It's a way of living life. One that we can, in this very busy life that we live, in this very busy world with all the distractions, and distractions will be a big part of this conversation, can get in the way. An aspect of ourself gets in the way of us manifesting an alignment between our intentions and our desires and where our passions naturally lead and where we find ourselves again and again and again. And because mindfulness is also something that's recognized as being a non-judgmental way of being. So as important as judgment is in the form we know of judgment to decision-making, to being a leader, what is it to be non-judgmental? A very, very different way of relating to experience that's not in any way inconsistent. To be non-judgmental of ourselves, so that when we do find ourselves again and again and again, not necessarily presenting ourselves to ourselves and others in the ways that we would like, we realize we can begin again, that there's this moment, that it's actually this moment that's here and upon us, not the one that just took place, that we're turning to again and again with doubt and regret and guilt and hesitation, second-guessing ourselves. So I'm assuming that you know nothing of mindfulness, but I do want you to be aware if you're not. The cover of Time magazine, a little bit over a year ago, this may be familiar to you. The Mindful Revolution, the science of finding focus in a stressed out, multitasking culture. It's nice that you raised multitasking already as a consideration, something that we all, who here has, during this time that we've been together, have felt the impulse to reach for your phone, and you somehow managed not to. That's an extraordinary thing, right? To have an impulse to do something, and to have some aspect that we bring to those moments where we don't. And how often we do. Whether it's food, whether it's yelling at somebody, whether it's not saying something when something needs to be said, whether it's saying something when something doesn't need to be said. And so today what we'll do is we'll talk about what mindfulness is, so that when you leave here and somebody says to you, do you know what's mindfulness? You might have something to say, but that's really not that important to me. If you leave here and somebody says to you, so what's this thing called mindfulness? And you say, I have no idea. I will have been successful. Because I have no idea what it is, and I've been practicing it for 25 years. And I suspect that any words I could possibly put to it will fall short, because then we'll be thinking about it. And mindfulness is not what you think. Truly, it's not what you think. So we'll talk about what mindfulness is, because especially in this context, it can be helpful. And there are ways of putting words to it. But remember, they're pointers. They're pointing us in a certain direction. Presence is pointing us in a certain direction. Communication, to communicate, is pointing us in a certain direction. It's not the answer, but it's putting words to something so we can have a conversation about it. To practice mindfulness, we will practice this thing called mindfulness and explore the different ways it can be practiced. We'll talk about the science of mindfulness. Here we have Scientific American Mind. On the cover of Scientific American Mind, sharpen your focus. how the science of mindfulness can improve your attention, so attention's a big part of mindfulness, and lift your mood. And we'll talk about the science that underlies a lot of this. Probably one of the reasons why mindfulness is becoming so popular, especially across society in ways that are highly skeptical. We talked about the skeptic. We all have our skepticism, which is also a variation of what? Curiosity, that Fred talked about as being so important. Skeptical, curious, skeptical and curious. One might be a little more defensive than the other, right? One might be a little more open than the other. Two sides of the same coin of who we are. A magazine. There's a magazine now. Does anybody know the magazine Mindful? It's a magazine called Mindful. It's all about mindfulness. Every page has something on it. Every story, mindfulness. And here on the cover we have neuroscientist Richie Davidson. He's one of our great neuroscientists. He's at University of Madison, Wisconsin, and he's one of the trailblazers leading the way, looking at research on practicing mindfulness, the practices that we will do, and how they are being found to be associated with very important changes to the structure and function of the brain. The structure and function of the brain. These are not practices that are meant to have us feel better in the moment. Simon said touchy-feely. Simon, how could you say touchy-feely? I wanted to hug you when you said that, but I didn't want to be touchy-feely. So we'll talk about the science just a little bit, because I don't want you to walk out of here saying, I know what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is the practice of paying attention, da, 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 da. And there's all this science. There's an article that came out of Harvard, da, da, da. Harvard came out of UCLA. Because then we're talking and thinking about it. That's what we're so good at. You're masters of that. You're great at that. This is an experiential practice. Presence is a way of experiencing the attitude. How do you say, oh, today I'm going to be genuine. Today I'm going to be authentic. Today I'll be authentic. You might start a little bit so that the first time something that's not authentic comes up, born out of insecurity, born out of doubt, even though you're not aware that it's necessarily taking root in that moment. And it flies away. It's hard to think your way into a present, deeply rooted way of being with yourself and with others. I loved comfortable with ambiguity, curiosity, communication, courage. And what touched me about that, and the idea of presence, of authenticity, of respect, of empathy, is that in many ways mindfulness, which runs through all of those, for purposes of our conversation, might be a bridge. The latter, what Steve talked about, was very much to me about a way of being, an attitude that flows through us. And what I heard Fred talk about in many ways, as we understand it, is skills to communicate and the importance of listening, as one example. So, for purposes of today, our time together, let's take comfortable with ambiguity, which oftentimes I would imagine, if I were to say, what's an ambiguous situation that you might be uncomfortable with? Somebody just say something. What's an ambiguous situation you might be uncomfortable with?
Ambiguity in a contract.
Ambiguity in a contract. Right? Or whatever the case may be. Ambiguity with a contract. And what's a situation where you might be curious? Curious about what? What could you be curious about?
New product strategy.
New product strategy. Curious about a new product strategy. And who might you communicate with even more effectively than you already do? Because we're all pretty good communicators. We can be better. We can improve every aspect of who we are. This is a life that's not meant to be like, I'm done, I've gotten there, I've done it. Who might we communicate more effectively with?
Boss.
A boss. And courage. Courage by doing something. What's an example of what might be a courageous act in the situation in which it presents itself? Public speaking. Oh, now that you said that, I'm self-conscious. Feel the feet. Feel the feet. Self-conscious because we're in an environment with other people. Nice. Let's turn all of those inward when we think about mindfulness. Comfortable with ambiguity. Yes, we want to be more comfortable with ambiguity. I was thinking CWA, right? CWA, that's what I thought when you said comfortable with ambiguity, CWA. And then I thought CYA, right? When we're not so comfortable with ambiguity, we do CYA. And when we are comfortable with ambiguity, there's less. So let's see if we can move from CYA to CWA. Right? See if we can have it where when something's ambiguous, rather than say, oh no, and I have to engage in all these defensive behaviors, fear-based behaviors, some of which are completely inappropriate, waste of time, gets other people scared and fearful too, or pushes them away, or gets in the way of problem solving. Be nice to not have that come along, because it helps us feel better. And of course, there's those times when doing the things that we need to do to take care of things, to document, etc., is very, very appropriate. Usually not born out of fear, usually born out of a response to the situation as it presents itself, and we're wise and we're attentive. But let's see if we can take these, comfortable with ambiguity. The ambiguity within ourselves. I don't know the answer. Can I be comfortable not knowing an answer? And then figure out what to do. Curious. To be curious about ourselves. You think you know yourself? I loved it, that commencement speech, right? I want you to be you. It's easier to want to be somebody else, because there they are. But what about you and who we are? So to be curious about who we are, what that means. And we'll talk about what that means, but it's the practicing of mindfulness that brings that to life without really trying. Because you are already you. I don't have any wonderful gifts like Steve had, these wonderful gems. Wait a minute, I do. I'm looking at them. Right? You're sitting in the seat of one right now. And then courage. This is where the mindfulness piece becomes especially interesting. Because this mindfulness is hard work. You talked about, I think, project management. Being easier said than done. Easy to talk about, Fred. Challenging to actually do. That's what mindfulness is like. It's easy to talk about it. You'll get it. You may already get it. But to practice it is among the most challenging things I think we can do. Pascal, the philosopher, mathematician, said, all of our problems are caused by our inability to sit quietly in a room by ourselves. All of our problems are caused by our inability to sit quietly in a room by ourselves. I don't think he was saying we have to sit quietly in a room by ourselves. He was saying what? We can't. The mindfulness practice is one that really is offering us the opportunity to be okay with the moment as it is, to not have to make it better. Not that we can't do things to improve upon situations and share things with people, but that we don't need to be okay. Then I think we come from a place that's poised at a balance point where the decisions we make and the actions we take and the things that we say are not born out of a need to feel better, but by what's actually called for in the moment. So this is a practice that will be one that has us looking inward. And the touchy-feely aspect is wonderful. I love touchy-feely stuff because it feels good. You said reduce stress, like an especially reduce stress. Mindfulness is not about reducing stress. I'm sorry, I just wanted to come and talk to you all, so I said it was. Now that I'm here, I figure, and I don't have treats to, I do have treats to give you. I do have treats. I have little treats. If somebody should say something that I find to be particularly interesting or especially unhelpful, especially if it's unhelpful, because that keeps, it real. You'll get a little treat. And toward the end, maybe I'll have you recite what's on this little treat, because that's the mindfulness lesson of sorts. So, does everybody know what mindfulness is? No, you have no idea. Who's been saying, I want to know what mindfulness is? Comfortable with ambiguity. Comfortable with ambiguity. And yoga. Who practices yoga? Who does yoga? Pilates, right? It's interesting. Yoga is that it's very hard a mindfulness practice. It's an awareness practice. Awareness of the body in many ways. We'll do 3 exercises today. We'll share 3 exercises. One, and then another, and then the third. And they'll layer on top of each other a little bit of information about what this mindfulness is all about. So we don't just do a practice and you go, oh, I did this mindfulness practice. You actually see it evolve. You see it evolve within yourself, perhaps, and you understand intellectually, as well as experientially, what it is that this mindfulness is about. But here, this yoga, because yoga has become very much an athletic thing. I'm sure for many of you here it's not. It's a very rich thing. Who practices yoga? Say in a word or two. Just say it out. What does yoga do for you? What's it like? What's the why? Why? Calmness. A calmness. Why else? Flexibility, self-awareness, absolutely. And so here, this particular yoga, very important yoga journal magazine, periodical, the mindful issue, practices, poses, and tips for focus and inner strength. Though yoga has always been a mindfulness practice, but we've forgotten that, many of us. And so this is an important reminder. So, that being said, what we will do today is this. We will practice mindfulness in 3 forms. We'll look at this little card that you all have in front of you, but please don't look at it just yet. It's much more interesting than perhaps the practice we're going to do is. So let's do our first practice. Now, first of all, I get the feeling that it would be good to stand for a moment. So let's stand up. This will be our first mindfulness practice. So stand up. Steve, I need your height. I need your height. Okay, now, when you did that standing, were you aware of standing? Or did you just stand? Did you just stand like you always stand? Or were you aware? Did you plumb the richness of the experience? Was it extraordinary? Was it, if this moment were your last, would it be okay because you really stood? Okay, have a seat. Have a seat. We can do this again. Okay, so when you sat down just now, were you aware of sitting down? Or did you just sit down the way you always sit down? So let's do it again. What do you think we're going to do if we're going to stand in a moment, aware of standing? What are some of the things? If you were giving the instruction, what would it be?
Feel your feet underneath.
Okay, so even while we're here now, before we're not even doing anything, can you feel your feet? Steve gave us this wonderful prime. Can you feel your feet making contact with the ground of your shoes? And a moment ago, you probably weren't. It's a shift, right? It's an intentional shift. Who brings about this shift? You do. You're sitting in a chair. Are you aware that you're sitting? I mean, this is real. Are you aware that you're sitting? Take a moment and be aware that you're sitting. Not that you know you're sitting. To really be there. And we'll talk in a moment about what it is that can get in the way. I did this because it's just the body knows the things. So let's stand, aware of our feet as we begin. A wonderful way to start. And then aware of the body, standing as you breathe. Let's do it. Slowly. A little more slowly than you normally do. And now that we're here, let's actually be here for a moment. Aware of sensations of your heart beating. The feeling of the body standing. It's a different posture. Don't miss it. There's a lot of important signs as to why this is important. Not that every time you stand and every time you sit you do this, because that's almost like asking too much of us. We're just not that attentive. It's not impossible. But something changes when we are able to bring ourselves back here. And so now let's sit, aware of sitting. Don't miss this opportunity. You may never do this again as a group. Okay, and so now let's do our first and a half mindfulness sitting. To lower or close the eyes, whichever you prefer. Mine will be closed, and I'm the one running the risk here because I'm still walking. Because we're cultivating an inner gaze. As you bring awareness to your body sitting in the chair, this chair, again, aware of the body sitting and noticing where your bottom makes contact with the seat of the chair, where your back makes contact with the back of the chair, and then just sitting. And then in the next moment or two, when you're ready, to lift the gaze, open the eyes. So if you would, in a word or two, describe whatever the heck just happened. In a word or two. If you would describe the experience, yes. Oh, it had a relaxing quality. Okay, it had a relaxing quality. Anybody notice it had a relaxing quality? What else? If you would describe in a word or two. Yes? Centered. It had a centering quality. What else?
Mindful.
Ooh. Oh, I have a present for you. Now hang on to it. What's your name? Madeline. Okay, Madeline. Hang on to it. And I know. Centering was really good. In fact, it was even better. Not than what you said. You took that personally?
Yeah.
No, it was even better than what I was thinking he was going to say.
Okay, good.
No, I just made that up. It was better than what you said. And then to the one who was courageous, started us off. Did anybody notice their mind wandering during that little exercise? Did anybody notice their mind wandering? Raise your hand if you noticed your mind wandering. Excellent, excellent. You get, if I had 2, I'd give you 2 for that. Did anybody else notice their mind wandering? You can't raise your hand because you want a ment. So what we just did was, it was just the beginning of a practice, right? And then you were left to your own devices, if you will. Devices, it's interesting, right? Because we think about our cell phones and our iPads as a device. This too is its own device. We think about the iPhone and the iPad and the computer and email, etc., as a distracting device. Is this a distracting device, you think? It's very common for the mind to wander away from where we place it. The task at hand, the person we're talking to. It's very common for this mind to wander. And you probably noticed your mind wandering to some extent. And if you didn't, you were probably asleep. Or you were saying, oh, this is so relaxing. And then I will suggest to you your mind was wandering. You were no longer there for the experience. You're now thinking about the experience. And off your mind went. Oh, this is comfortable. Oh, I like this. Oh, I should do more of this. Oh, I should get a book. Let me look in the materials and see what books he has out there. Oh, I have to call my friend and let her know that I'm doing this thing because she's going to be so happy because she's always telling me about mindfulness. And off we go. And we don't even realize we've taken off. We don't realize we've taken off. There's research that came out of, given these hallowed halls, Harvard, not that long ago. Daniel Gilbert, social psychologist, and his colleague Killingsworth, and they came out with a study where they gave people, thousands and thousands of people, a cell phone. They were part of the study. It's amazing now you can do studies that are really big, as you may know. And they gave, during the day, they were just prompted. Essentially, are you on task or not? On a scale from 1 to 5. And whenever they got that and they looked, they were like, oh, what am I doing, right? Not on task. Or, yeah, I'm on task, okay. And guess what they found when they then put it all together? What percentage of the time our minds are wandering during the day? 47%. 47% of the time our minds are off task. We've put them on task. We're not daydreaming and being creative and all the good stuff that can flow out of a mind that can meander. Where does intuition come from? Where does creativity come from? Not the mind that's not usually how it happens. The aha moments come when we're not hooked on something. I find that 47% of the time our mind is wandering. And here's the kicker, and we don't realize it. We are not aware that we're off task. We're not aware that we're thinking about something that may or may not happen tomorrow, that usually we're worried about, which is why our mind keeps going there, and now we're anxious, and now our heart rate's going up, and like you said, Steve, so nicely, the person in the room has no idea that that's even happening, but we've become different. They also asked another question. They said, and what is your mood? What is your mood now? Also on a scale from 1 to 5. And what do you think they found? When the person was on task and focused, was their mood higher or lower than when they were off task? When their mind was on task and focused, their mood was higher. And hence, because when they were off task, their mood dropped or was lower, the research that came out of this and the way it was talked about in the popular press was a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And when our mind is left to its own devices, a little bit of the science called the default network, we now know that when the mind is left to its own devices, not given the task, not really put itself somewhere to get something done, it tends to wander, and the place it wanders is usually a place that's filled with doubt, my problems, my worries, the things that I'm concerned about. We're not asking to go there. We're not problem solving. We're not figuring something out. We just sort of can't help ourselves. It's where our mind tends to go. So if you would, take a look at the illustration that you have. The landscape of the mind. What are some of the places? Oh, I know this table, our table didn't get one. Here, actually I have some in there from a different. Go ahead and take those. Thank you. What are some of the places that you notice that your mind wanders to from time to time? Yes?
Do you suppose the reason people answered that they were unhappy when their mind was wandering is we're taught that we're supposed to, at least while we're at work, we're supposed to be focused, and so when we realized our minds are wandering, the answer is, well, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, so therefore we're unhappy. Not necessarily, you may have been thinking of your trip to Hawaii or your garden and you're having this great time. So you may not really be unhappy, but you think you're doing something you're not supposed to be
Okay.
doing.
Interesting. So Neil's asking a wonderful question. He's saying, is it possible? I found a confound. I found a flaw in the study. It's like, is it possible that they were, it's a wonderful question, is it possible that they were, in fact, caught in the act? And they feel maybe guilty or bad or shame or whatever it may be, and either that results in them, for whatever reason, or feeling, reporting.
Not necessarily that they are.
Right, so a little response bias in some form. I think that it's a wonderful hypothesis, and for the sake of placating you, I'm going to say I think that's also what happened. But I don't. I don't know. I think that there's enough research that shows that default network kicks in. That default network kicks in where the mind goes to the places that are riddled with doubt and hesitation, etc., that sort of provides additional information that the mind that wanders is a less happy mind. It's a mind that wanders into the future where we start getting anxious about things. It's a mind that wanders into the past where we're feeling regret. But I have no doubt that there are some people for whom they would have that happen, and then they would self-report in a way that wasn't necessarily truly in line with how they were feeling. Yeah. So what are some of the places? Neil, what's some place that you notice in the landscape of the mind that your mind goes to from time to time?
Planning things for the weekend. It's certainly not an unhappy place.
No, on this landscape of the mind.
Sorry.
That's okay, Neil. What are some of the places that you notice, Neil, that the mind goes to from time to time? But you're absolutely right, Neil. The mind that wanders it's not a negative thing in and of itself. What are some of the places that you in the back, the way back? Oh, it's so hard to connect with people in the way back unless I go way back there. But then when I go way back there, you all have to move. Is that like annoying? I'm moving around. Would it be better if I just sort of stayed here? Do what I want, Lisa, thank you. What are some of the places that you notice that your mind wanders to in the back? And Neil, at any time. To-do list. The to-do list. Right. Anybody have it where your mind is almost perpetually turning to that to-do list? Right? And it can be very constructive. And sort of the insight that Neil offers, that can be constructive. But sometimes we go to that to-do list for the 16th, 17th, 18th time, and we're not able to do it right then and there, but we can't take our mind off of it, to which we can ask the question periodically, which is in some ways a mindfulness question, is this helpful? Is this helpful? Because we sort of think it is. Part of us thinks it is. I'm not going to let the shoe drop. I'm not going to miss something. Born out of what? The valley of fear. But we sort of can't help ourselves, because when it takes grip, when it takes hold, it's very hard to reason your way out of feeling a certain way. And we know that. It's okay, you can't do anything about it. We'll wait a week, then we'll get the result. Just wait a week, you don't have to. And your mind just keeps churning. The mindfulness practice is very much attentive to this. Changing the structure and function of parts of the brain, like in the areas of the prefrontal cortex that are associated with focus and concentration, to be able to bring yourself back, to be able to regulate emotions, a part of the brain called the amygdala. Some very interesting research. Amygdala is the part of the brain that becomes active when we become afraid. In particular, the emotional core of the brain associated very much with fear. And mindfulness practices, and we'll do one in a moment, have been found to actually result in less activation of the amygdala, notwithstanding a similar stimuli that previously led to a greater activation, and even an attenuation of the fibers, a thinning of the fibers of this part of our brain through the mindfulness practice where we're not even seemingly moving. Brings us to another metaphor that Steve raised of the going to the gym. We'll talk about that. What are some of the other places that you have noticed that your mind wanders to from time to time on this landscape? Please just say it out. The river of regret. Thank you. I know, it's funny. Before I went to law school, I was in graduate school in social psychology, and we did all these studies with rats and things. And this idea, we pecked. Did you answer that because you forgot about it? You don't need a mint? Well, I didn't think you needed a mint. But you're getting one, because I'm going to ask you what it says at the end. All right, or Madeline, maybe I'll ask you. River of regret. Does anybody have a mind that periodically turns to the past, gets caught in something that happened yesterday or the day before, or even 20 or 30 years ago? And when it arises and when we're there, how do we tend to feel when we're caught in the river of regret, when we're going down the river of regret? How do you tend to feel in those moments? So imagine the mind wanders off to places, changes our mood, changes our motivation, changes many aspects of what we might do, and then we sort of come back. Now, I think there's a reason why our mind goes to these places. I think there's something to be gleaned. Mindfulness practices, when you go very deep into it, oftentimes are called insight practices. We get insight. There's a reason we're going back there. There's a lesson to be learned. If only we could go back to those places and stay steady, right? So we can really be there and learn from it. But when we go to those places, we become shaky. And we want to cultivate through the mindfulness practice the ability to really hold ourselves steady in the face of an angry person, in the face of our own sad self, sad in that moment, in the face of news that's very disconcerting, to be able to be courageous in those moments. But how? How? Hence the next practice we'll do. So if you would, bring yourself into a posture that's upright and stable. The posture that's upright and stable as we lower, sitting. Yeah, good. Comfortable, we have ambiguity. It was ambiguous. As we lower or close our eyes, may I close this door? Is that like a fire hazard and we're going to... We lower or close our eyes, bringing ourselves into a posture that's upright and stable, because this is a practice of waking up, not of falling asleep. This is a practice of cultivating alertness, not going off to some happy place. There's times and places for that too. Not now, not here, not this practice. As you bring your attention, as we did before, to our body sitting in the chair, oh yeah, that's right, I'm still here, still in this chair. Let me be here. And one way that we do that is we bring our attention to what's actually happening in this moment. And the sensations of your body touching the chair are happening in this moment. The thought about next week's assignment or next week's project or next week's whatever is not happening now. The thought's happening, but the experience is not, and we're lost in that experience. So let us find ourselves in what's really happening now. Aware of the sensations of your body making contact with the chair as you breathe. Aware of your bottom making contact with the seat of the chair, the cushion. Aware of your back making contact with the back of the chair. Aware of your feet making contact with the ground or your shoes. Aware of the sense of touch inspired by this moment and the way you're attending to it. Because this is a practice of coming to our senses. Truly coming to our senses. Aware of the body, not just sitting here as an abstract concept, but a body moving with the breath. Curious about this body moving with the breath, expanding on the in-breath, torso expanding, rib cage, shoulders lifting, and softening on the out-breath. Aware of the breath itself. Aware of the in-breath and aware of the out-breath. Following it. Not trying to breathe a certain way, not having a slow breath or a full breath. No. Aware of this moment as it is. Aware of you as you are. Authentic. Attending to the breath, this breath. You've never had this one before, you'll never have this one again, and one day you won't have them. It's like a friend who knows the way. All you have to do is follow. And because the mind will wander, already has, surely will again. When you notice that your mind is wandering, that's a moment of mindful awareness. You've just woken up. When you notice your mind has wandered, is wandering away, gently bring your attention back to either the body sitting in the chair or the breath flowing through the body. "47% of the time it's going to wander, unbidden. Right now you have the intention, you form the intention to place your attention on an object, the breath or the body, and the mind will wander away. When you notice your mind wandering, gently return. And then, when you're ready, in the next moment or two, with an awareness of doing so, to lift the gaze, open the eyes. And by the way, whatever you have that you acquire, that you cultivate through what we just did for all of 2 minutes, that's a tool that you can bring into your life. We have 1,440 minutes in the day. In my law school class, I take a big pile of dimes, 1,440 dimes, and I put them in front of the students. And I say, guess how many dimes are here? I've done this in front of accountants. They all give the same answer, about 350. We don't realize how many dimes, we don't realize how much time we have. And to take 3 of them out, 4 of them out. But as Pascal said, he said it for a reason. We have a great many problems in our life. No, he didn't say that. All of our problems are caused by our inability to sit quietly in a room by ourselves. We take the 3 dimes, we take the 3 minutes, we say we're going to sit down, and we tend not to ever get there. Or we do, and the phone rings, and we conveniently left it close by, and off we go. So we'll come back in a moment to the value of this practice and the forms it can take. But that's a mindfulness practice. What did we do? What were the pieces? We placed our attention on an object. What was that object? Ourselves, the breath, the body. And when what happened? What happened? Did anybody's mind wander during that exercise? Of course, and that's great. What did we do when we realized our mind was wandering? Or what was the instruction, at least? Not always so easy to do. To bring our attention back. Back to what? The object, ourselves. Back to the object. Again and again and again. William James, the wonderful psychologist and philosopher, said, the faculty of bringing a wandering attention back again and again and again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. He was a pretty smart guy. He didn't say the faculty of bringing a wandering attention back is the very root of judgment, character, and will. He said bringing it back again and again and again. And that's what this practice is very much about. It's about finding a place, placing our attention on an object, and when we notice our mind wandering, bringing it back. And not surprisingly, the parts of the prefrontal cortex that are associated with concentration and focus actually become thicker. They actually become thicker. It's called neuroplasticity. You might be familiar with that term, the brain's capacity to change in response to experience. And this is called self-directed neuroplasticity. You are changing. And if we don't, what we find now is this: the brain's always changing. It just keeps reinforcing the ways that we tend to have been conditioned, maintaining them, the reactivity. Anybody ever have it where somebody gets angry at you and you become angry back? And you wish you didn't and you wonder why? What if you were aware of the sensations of anger as they began to arise? What if you became aware of the thought? Remember, thoughts are not facts. You became aware of the thought. This person is outrageous. I can't believe this. And you go, oh, there's a thought. How interesting to be able to recognize that there's a thought arising that's now calling the shots, or a feeling that's arising that's motivating you to take action to feel better. What if instead we had the courage, we had cultivated the capacity in those moments to be able to hold ourselves steady? Because those moments come and those moments go. And we tend not to wait them out, even though it could be a matter of a few seconds later. And so when we sit and we practice, you will have thoughts. This is called the landscape of the mind, the attractive nuisance. Remember that from my torts? My tort teacher was named Joe also. And in my torts class, we had the attractive nuisance cases. And in particular, I remember one which was where these young boys were out 100 or so years ago in this gorgeous field on a hot day, when no fences. And it was a hot day and there was this gorgeous pool. Do you remember this case? And they went diving in the pool and it was toxic. It was a poison pool. They perished. Questions, of course, are always interesting. Whose negligence, should they have had signs up, trespassing. But really, this is the nature of our mind. The places that you notice, the river of regret. Does it feel good to go to the river of regret? Not necessarily. Maybe in some ways at sometimes. It's interesting, right? But usually no. I'm worried about tomorrow's test results, and we keep going there. It's like an attractive nuisance. There's something about it that pulls us to there. So the mindfulness practice is good, so be it. There's actually perhaps something to be gleaned from that. But for now, 50 minutes remaining? I know, I've got 5 minutes. People are like, 50 minutes remaining. Mindfulness is about learning to see clearly. 50 minutes, 5 minutes. Our mind tends to go to these places again and again and again, presenting us with an almost forever unfolding opportunity to have it go there, and when we notice that it has, to come back. The gym metaphor is nice in this regard also. It's like we go to the gym. In fact, it's oftentimes talked about as exercising the muscle of attention. When you realize your mind is wandering, you bring it back. You got to realize it. That's why that's an extraordinary moment. 47% of the time, you think you're aware, you think I'm aware. 40% of the time when my mind's gone off, no. Somebody says something and off I go. I'm not even paying attention. I'm with my wonderful wife, my beautiful children. We're having a conversation. I'm at work with a wonderful colleague. We're having an important meeting, and something is either jarring or my mind is just elsewhere, and off I go. I don't even realize it. What if I did? What if I caught it sooner and brought it back sooner, before it gets to that point where the parade of horribles looms large? That's why there's this interesting relationship between attention and the ability to regulate our emotions. The greater capacity we have to be attentive and remain attentive and notice when our mind wanders, the more we're able to bring our attention back and maintain that regulatory capacity of our emotional well-being. So I've got 3 minutes left. How to use these 3 minutes wisely. Mindfulness is oftentimes also talked about as non-judgmental awareness. Madeline, if you would, what does it say? You put it in your bag. Yes, please. And by the way, anybody who writes to me or emails me, I will send you one. I promise. What does it say?
Look inside.
Oh, go slow, go slow.
Look inside.
Look inside. So where's inside? If before this moment, where would you be looking? In here? Where are we looking now? You get it.
I get the one answer I should keep saying.
Yes.
Myself.
Right, yes. We look inside. Continue, please. Thank you.
To find.
To find, inquisitive, curiosity. What?
Refreshing.
Refreshing.
Judgments.
Judgments. Look inside to find refreshing judgments, because the anger and how horrible this person is when you are lost in and identifying with that experience is not a pleasant place to be, but it is where the mind has gone, and we honor this aspect of ourselves. We've been conditioned. It's no surprise. But to be aware and go, there I go. Now it's a game changer. Now we have a capacity to do something meaningfully and skillful with it. So I want to leave you with the flyer that you have, the one-pager on the back, has some information you'll find helpful. You don't need to look at it now. One thing in particular is called the stop practice. So if you wanted to really practice mindfulness the way people practice mindfulness, you'd find 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 5 minutes a day, and you'd sit down, and you would do exactly what is written on the back of that card and what we've done. Place your attention on the breath. When your mind wanders, bring it back. By the way, when you're at work, you place your attention on, there's nothing about the breath that's so special, the person. And when your mind wanders, you come back to the person. This is a very meaningful, portable, applicable practice. But stop is this. You see a stop sign, you'll be reminded. You write stop on a Post-it and you put it somewhere, you'll be reminded. S, stop. This can be a practice that lasts as long as a breath or as long as you'd like. But you gotta put some space between you and that moment, as it is otherwise. T, take a breath. So let's take a breath, aware of this breath. We miss so many. Of course, our mind is elsewhere, and oftentimes it makes a lot of sense. But this is a practice of intentionally saying, I'm going to find the time, respect myself, to really be here in a way that science is finding isn't just so you feel better in the moment, but you actually begin to change the nature of this very important tool. You take a breath, aware of taking a breath. Then you observe the heart racing, the mind and where it's going. All right? The feeling tone, frustration, just to notice it, not to change it. Mindfulness isn't about I have to change or fix anything. It's like I can be here for this moment, and if I see it more fully for what it is, maybe something very meaningful will change of its own accord, because I already have inside of me what it is, and I can cultivate more of it. So you observe, just for a breath or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, whatever. And then, as many of you may have to do in this moment, you pee. Sorry, couldn't help myself. You proceed, and then you continue on with what you're doing. Maybe it'll actually change course a little bit. Maybe it won't. That doesn't matter. I've so enjoyed spending time with you all, being here with you all, and sharing this time with everybody. Thank you all very, very much.